Greg Bakun here. Like you, I love good, fresh, delicious food. So I want to tell you about this treasure in Roseville called Maverick's Real Roast Beef. Maverick's has the best roast beef sandwiches I've ever had. Made fresh every order. Add fries or onion rings dropped in the fryer when ordered, and you have a winning combination. Maverick's Real Roast Beef has a lot more than roast beef, so check out their website, mavericksbeef.com, or check out their restaurant on Lexington in Roseville.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience. Because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I hope everyone is having a great week so far. Last night we had a little discussion about Star Trek, since Sunday was Star Trek Day. And we're going to kind of take it back on course here tonight and talk a little bit more paranormal and back to maybe some cryptid talk and whatnot. I'm very excited. We are going to have a conversation today with Morgan Knudsen, and she has been involved in the world of paranormal phenomenon for 20 years. Her story begins with a great grandfather, Dr. Albert Durant Watson, who was the president of the Association for Psychical Research of Canada in 1918, co-founding and leading Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings in 2003. Her experiences and knowledge has led to researching and co-creating a unique investigative program called Teaching the Living, and subsequently had been featured on and hosted numerous specials and TV shows. For example, the Discovery Channel, A Haunting, Haunted Hospitals, Paranormal 911, My Haunted Hometown, which we're going to be talking about tonight. Morgan is also a producer for various podcasts and television projects, both national and international, as well as the production consultant for Blue Ant Media. Morgan can also be heard on her podcast, Supernatural Circumstances, with co-host and co-creator Mike Brown, which delves into the mysterious, the spiritual, and the fascinating things in our universe. As host and creator of Sold Out Dinner Galas video productions, as well as in-depth walking classrooms that give the people hands-on experiences in the investigative field in both psi and cryptids, Morgan has brought her unique and paradigm-shifting programs to television, conferences, comic expos, theaters, workshops, fundraisers, and more. Amongst other topics we're going to be talking about tonight, we're going to be talking about our new show, My Haunted Hometown, on the T+E channel. Morgan, welcome to GhostBox Radio.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
Thank you so much. And I know that, I mean, you're a busy person, so just to be able to get you on has been really exciting. And so this new show has that premiered on September 6th?
I think so. Yeah.
Gosh, and it's just one of many. Can you tell me a little bit about the show, please?
Yeah, sure. So the show is mainly focused around the idea of towns, small towns, as specifically in Canada, but throughout the US as well, looking at really weird things that have happened there and talking about not just one particular case, but multiple cases within the same environment, within the same strange town. And it's really it's fascinating. It's a fun romp for people to sort of take a look at some of these places that maybe otherwise they'd never see. And it's cool. It's well shot, and it's lots of fun.
As somebody who has had a career in production, I think when you say well shot, it's a very important piece to it, much more so than I don't expect everybody who watches these shows to know what well shot is, but they do know what well shot is.
Yeah.
They see it.
You do see it, and that's one thing that caught me about this show. And I mean, when I get hired on as a an expert, I guess, to talk about it. And I mean, sometimes they leave my explanations on the cutting room floor, and sometimes they don't. I've got no control over that, but it's visually, it's always very interesting. And the way this one has been shot, there's been a lot of time put into it, and it's a beautiful show to watch, which is really cool for me.
Gosh, I mean, I don't expect you to know when it comes over to the US per se, but I mean,
I have no clue.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But I do know, like, we just had Brandon Alvis on about a month ago talking about haunted discoveries, and we
Yeah,
know
great
it's
guy.
I think I could say with unknown confidence, if that's even a thing. Like, I don't know anything about anything, but I'm sure it's going to make its way over here in some way, shape, or form for people to watch. And I think that the idea of talking about these towns and talking about these the stuff that people been kind of whispering about within these towns for decades. I've always thought that that was an area to explore in television. I'm really happy to hear that something like that is happening in the form of this show.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many strange small towns with strange and dark histories that, especially in Canada, don't get discussed. In the States, they're put forward a little bit more readily than in Canada. In Canada, it's very hush hush. You don't talk about those things, and so it's interesting to see some of these histories being peeled back. And what you discover about places that maybe you just drive through on the way to somewhere else.
Right.
uh, and you find out that there's this really, really fascinating, unique story behind it, whether they be serial killers or um, strange fires or all sorts of different things that you're like, "Ah, why aren't we being taught this? Why aren't we being told any of this?" And yeah, it's there. So you got to talk to the locals when you're a researcher and an investigator, which is something I always try to do. You can only find so much in the history books. So you got to talk to the people that live there, and they'll tell it to you straight.
You've been doing this long enough. Do you go by some of these places just on your own? Like, you're just traveling through Canada. Do you ever just stop by and just right away? It's just like, this is a place that I think we need to check out, whether for a TV show or whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, usually when I get called to do a show or something like that, most of the time it's, they kind of pass me a case and say, "Can you talk about this case?" And that's what I do. I get to sit and research and read some of these stories, and then you hope you make it into the cut, and if you don't, well, you don't.
Yeah.
But the yeah, like here, especially in Alberta, because I'm from Alberta, we have a plethora of strange places here, and a incredible expanse of different types of phenomena, everything from UFOs to cryptids to hauntings to, I mean, high strangeness, really weird stuff. And so it's impossible not to travel even within the province, and you're a stone's throw from some weird story. One of the things that I told people recently in a documentary that I shot here is that most of the towns in Alberta, for instance, are named after priests and fathers,
Mm.
settlers and whatnot, who have actually been involved in cases of Wendigo. And which, again, people don't realize, they don't know. And it's like, it's incredible once you realize that there's so much history even within these places that you maybe wouldn't shake a stick at. Yeah, you can't help but want to know more.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they hear about Wendigo and stuff like that, they think that's something that's over there. That's something that doesn't affect us. That's like, in the States, a Native American thing. So therefore, even though they believe it highly, that rest of us, we have nothing to worry about. But that's the thing. It's like, why would it stop with a culture? And it's often goes to other cultures, but maybe have different names as well.
Yeah, very much so. And one of my jobs throughout my career, 'cause I've been doing this a really long time, was teaching in post-secondary
Mhm.
parapsychology and things like that for a number of years. And that was the one thing that I noticed, was that you'd have a classroom full of people from all over the world. and everybody would have a story about the phenomenon that you were talking about, and they called it different things,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day it was really the same thing. And many of these stories, which, as like you say, many people just sort of brush it off as lore or something like that. The one thing that I've really come to understand is that it is really deeply rooted in our history. So, for example, like bringing it back to something like the Wendigo, the first legal hanging in Alberta was a Wendigo case. So it's buried right into our law, and our legal history here. So, I mean, I don't think you can separate the two things.
When I would, it sounds to me like that was at a time when that wasn't more lore, but more like in really embedded in culture. Whereas it seems like over time we have moved away to think such things are not possible. Like the general
Yeah.
we, obviously,
Yeah.
folks like you and I, not so much. But you know what I mean, though. And but back then,
Mhm.
that is those are real concerns and real, and it really played a part in daily life.
Very much so, and still is today in many
Mm,
of these. It's
sure.
talking about small towns, in many of these areas, especially in Canada, where you've got vast openness. Where we've got our big cities, just as the same as the U.S., but we've got a lot less population here, and there's still areas and provinces that, I mean, you can drive 4 days straight and not hit the other side of the province.
Oh boy.
People don't realize, I think, just how vast it actually can be here. And so it's very easy for cultures and whatnot in these areas to hang on to these stories a little bit more. And the more you dig into them, the more you realize this isn't just making up a bedtime story to keep the kids in. There's
Yeah.
something to a lot of this stuff, and unless we really respect and take this stuff seriously, we're not going to learn as a people and as a culture.
I think that's such a good point about the respect factor to it.
Yeah.
And why do you think, in general, I'm going to say everything in general, because obviously folks like our listeners, your viewers, everything else, we
Yeah.
think a little bit differently than this. But why do you think we generally have lost that sort of respect, where we do kind of push all that towards not real at all, nothing to worry about, like you said, a story to keep the kids in bed? Where do you think we kind of strayed a little bit?
It's been interesting to sort of watch the arc over the years, because when, of course, when people first started, everything was explained supernaturally,
Mm,
and as the world progressed and people progressed, then we got into the realm of science, and then science took over, and then I think science became a bit of a religion. You hear the word
mm.
scientism quite a bit, and scientism, for the listeners, is when science becomes a doctrine rather than a tool. And so I think we hit that point a little bit where we kind of ended up in this sort of doctrine where if you can't see it or taste it or touch it, then it's not real. And now I think as science has progressed into the realm of quantum science, quantum biology, quantum physics, things like that, I think it's learning again how to meld these two worlds, where we realize that no, we don't understand it all, and there's things that are coming up now within the scientific world that are proving many of these things that we once considered, oh no, that's silly, that's just a bedtime story, oh, just you're being ridiculous.
Right.
And now things are kind of coming full circle again, where people are realizing it. But I think you're always going to have your stragglers, who will sit in the back corner and just they're just going to be grumpy about it, and
Yeah.
disagree with whatever you put in front of them. But those people you're never going to change. They're typically the people that are insecure about the world, and insecure about their perception of the world. And it's the adventurers and the scientists and the people who are willing to go outside the box, who will take the explorers with them, and then they're the explorers as well. So I think that's kind of how things have progressed and whatnot. And as I say, I think when you get these people that are coming forward with their stories, um, it's you got to be careful who you tell your story to at the end of the day. Not everybody is going to take it seriously. Not everybody
Yeah.
is going to respect your experience. Yeah, it's just one of those things, and I think we've been like that since the dawn of time.
And do you think, once again, as a general, I think in my experience, I feel like that we are becoming much more open generally to concepts that maybe over the last 50 years, not so much.
Oh yeah, I think we have as well. I mean, and I think part of that is because it's becoming more mainstream.
Yeah.
Thanks to people initially like Dan Aykroyd, who was able to, put together something like Ghostbusters that put this
Yeah.
on the dining room table for us to talk about,
Absolutely.
in a really fun way. And I think it's becoming more mainstream. Now, that being said, it's also opening the door to a lot of misinformation and charlatans, which is,
Hmm.
something that I've been really, really aggressively passionate about with this field. Every time I'm given a segment on a show, I want it to be the most accurate in terms of what we know now about scientific clinical parapsychology as possible. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that we have to be now very careful, as we're listening to these people, and the people that they're labeling on the shows as experts,
Yep.
um, as to exactly, well, what are you expert in? What's your education? What's your background? Start
Absolutely.
questioning this, because it's opening up another can of worms.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's take our first break. When we come back, there's just so much that we're going to be talking about with Morgan. I don't even know where do we go next, because there's so much I want to talk about, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. And welcome back to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight we have with us Morgan Knudsen. We've been talking about My Haunted Hometown, which is a new series that started, but there's so much more to get to there than that. And we did talk about it in the first segment. We'll maybe get to it again a little bit, but let's talk about some other stuff. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, Morgan, basically, was how I think I kind of mutilated your bio a little bit. Words are not always easy for me. Okay, I mean that's just not. You
I
know,
thought you did a good job. I don't know.
well, you're being kind, and I appreciate that. Now, so you said your story begins with a great great grandfather, Dr. Albert Durant Watson,
Yeah.
and he was the president of the Association of is that psychical?
Psychical. Yep.
Psychical. I've never really said that out loud, as I think everyone has just realized. The Association for Psychical Research of Canada. Now, is this your great great grandfather or someone that you consider as such?
No, this is my great great grandfather, and what's interesting about this is that he was a very famous and notable physician in Ontario. Anybody can Google his name, and we'll find a plethora of resources about his work, because he was a very famous physician, and he was also an astronomer and a poet, published poet, and had an absolutely incredible career. He was is a very noted person in history. And interestingly, I didn't know about him until about 6 years into my own career with
Wow.
the paranormal, which is really cool. And what I found really fascinating was that his work was always about presenting what he felt was fact, and what he experienced. And he ended up publishing 2 books on the subject, and they were extremely positive. They were very hopeful. At the time, you were kind of delving into the beginning of, science is God and science is everything. And he put out his both books at a very precarious time, where people either wanted to believe that this stuff was completely hokey, or they wanted this scary seance story.
Right.
And he dared to put out something different, and his work very much consisted of bringing hope, bringing uh, a new look into being able to connect with all that is around us, and non-physical and spirits and things like that. And there was nothing negative about it. He blew open a lot of the lore and stigma and silliness about, this sort of ghost hunting type thing. Um, and he took a lot of flack for it, and whatnot. But what fascinated me was that as I was progressing in my own work, that this was the same path that I was going down also. And at the time, I didn't even know about him. So I definitely feel like there's a very deep connection and a calling with what I'm doing in comparison with what AD did as well.
It's beautiful, actually,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, it's that that lineage. I think many of us wish that we would have with other family members, and I'm not saying necessarily that, like, my family were like hating the fact of what I do or anything, but to be able to have that, even if it's after the fact, it's still like, yeah, this family, this is what we do.
Yeah.
It's really, it's very unique, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. And the rest of the family, I don't know if they really see it that way. I mean, they didn't obviously weren't very invested in him because I didn't know about
'Cause
it.
you didn't know.
So I can't say that for maybe the rest of them, but uh I think this stuff has a kind of a memory to it. And I definitely feel like AD has been an inspiration, even a subconscious one throughout what I've done. And he continues to be an influence. His two books are phenomenal. I encourage anybody to get them. They're in reprint. You can actually still order them. And it's really cool to be able to read what he documented, which was so far ahead of his time. And you can't help but feel that connection. And I believe what he did was real, and I believe that it was probably some of the most impactful work in parapsychology to date.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit from the first segment, when you're talking about the way that sometimes people talk about the stuff that's going on in these small towns, or just maybe even a little bit of paranormal in general, you kind of said that people in Canada kind of keep their mouths shut about that sort of thing. Why do you think that is? Because like you rightly said, it feels like that there's a difference there, especially in the U.S. I mean, we're every you can't throw a rock without hitting somebody who has had a paranormal experience, or to talk about it.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's in the same fashion. It's kind of that way here too, in the sense that most people have had something go on,
Mhm.
but yet when they're asked to come forward with something, like, in an interview or something like that, it's like, oh, no, 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 I don't want to do that though. Like, I'll tell
Sure.
you my story in
Yeah.
secret, but don't put me on camera, or don't use my real name. That's a big one. Don't use my real, I can't tell anybody. So yeah, as to where that's come from, I've had this conversation so many times. A good friend of mine who writes for the Superstitious Times, he's writing a book. And that was one of the things that he was fighting with this book, was that, why is it that Canada is so different from the States? In the US, for example, you can, like you were saying, throw a stone and hit a Bigfoot conference, or
Right.
you know, or
Right.
or something, right? Like some sort of celebration about, like, the Queen Mary hosting their ghost stuff, and whatever. You don't find stuff like that here. And I don't know. I'm not sure what it is. I think it is a cultural difference, systemically.
Hmm.
The idea that, mm, you don't ruffle feathers with Canadians is predominant. Canadians don't want to be the one that's like, oh, I don't want to be the bad guy. I don't want to say the thing that's going to set off a chain of events. So I think that's a part of it. It's just a very, very different culture in Canada, even though we're neighbors. It's very different. So yeah, I definitely find myself with a lot of American friends.
Sure.
Because of that reason, because to me it's something to be celebrated, like this connection with non-physical and with spirit, and with understanding that there is no death, and all of these amazing things, to me, is something that you want to nurture. And what's fascinating is that when I do a workshop, or I do a stage show or whatever, they're packed, like floor to ceiling, packed with people. They're sold out. And but yet, yeah, just if you ask them to come up and do an interview about it, they'll tell you no way. It's
No
funny.
way. Not doing it.
No.
That must make it hard to make stuff like TV shows and stuff, when
It's tricky.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you had answered my other question of, like, okay, if they're not really doing it up there, do you think that there's a need to? And I have just a quick I guess, a bias a little bit because, yeah, we do a lot of like paranormal conventions and stuff, but I feel like that we really in America we're really pushing towards like the TV personalities and stuff. And there are some that are, focused towards the lecture and whatever else, but I feel like that there's more of a need to get people out there to be able to talk about stuff that aren't necessarily connected to like a television show. And I put television shows separate from like podcasts and stuff because to me
Yeah.
you have the ability to talk about whatever you want with podcasts. Television shows often they have, not always perhaps, but more likely than not, there's a route we're going with the television show. That's just my personal bias, I guess.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, I share the same bias. And there are so many academics that are out there who are very good friends of mine, very dear friends of mine who have been in parapsychology for literally 50 years, who have been involved in the true science behind this, who have worked for, everywhere from Duke University to Harvard to
Hmm.
Oxford to Northampton, all these universities, Princeton, Yale, who has had parapsychology labs over the years, and these people get readily ignored,
Yeah.
and absolutely ignored. And that's where the real is. Like that's where the realism is. People often say, "Oh, the TV shows are kind of campy." Well, yeah, they are campy because most of the time they bring on people who don't know what the hell they're doing.
No.
And it's a brutal reality of this, that at the end of the day they're looking for people to say what they want to say, what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And I do my, like I was saying at the beginning, I see these shows as an opportunity to bring good information to people. But I'll say, for example, like I'll put out an explanation about what something is. If I think something's not real, or they've made a mistake or something like that, and it gets cut,
Oh,
it doesn't end up in the show.
yeah.
And they'll replace that with somebody saying that there's, demons coming out of your wall. And but it's the battle you've got to fight. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where if we don't have people in parapsychology that really, really know what they're talking about, that are willing to sort of fight the fight and get into these TV shows and try to get those explanations in there, there's really no, there's not many accessible ways for people to garner this information. So, I try to get in there. I try to, put my stuff in there. As I say, half the time it ends up on the cutting room floor, but it's the best that you can do.
And you don't have any control over it. I
None,
mean, there is
none.
nothing that you can do, but what is nice about, like, it, I guess, in a sense, is, you have the cachet, people know, who you are, and you also have the ability of, like, the television appearance is like the hors d'oeuvre. If you wanna know more, like, really get into the deep, dark, whatever, you believe in, that's what the podcasts and other
Yeah.
things that you do for you do so much that there's a great way to figure out exactly your thoughts on probably just about anything, quite honestly.
Yeah, well, that's why Mike Brown and I started Supernatural Circumstances.
Mhm.
That was the fuel behind why we wanted to do that podcast. And because Mike, his original industry was true crime, and one of the things that he was very dedicated to was telling these stories accurately. And so we wanted to do the same thing with parapsychology and have the best minds in the world, not the people that are the most famous,
Right.
but the best minds in the world, to talk about these subjects in a way that was fun, that was accessible to listeners, and that was, like people nerding out on something that was really interesting, which
Sure.
is what Mike and I do anyway. I mean, we get on the phone and we're nerding out about this stuff, and it's great and whatnot. But we wanted to bring on the best people in the world, and that, recently we've had on a number of times Dr. Eben Alexander, who's a neurologist. He's New York Times bestseller of Proof of Heaven. He had an incredible near-death experience that really put him on the map, and so we work with him frequently. We've got people whose names people will recognize, like Lloyd Auerbach, who's often on. Lizette Coley is the president of the Parapsychological
Mhm.
Association, or the Parapsychology Foundation. Sorry. We've had on some of the best people. Um, in the world. Even Matt Baglio, who wrote The Right, he was the journalist who looked into exorcism, and we had him on. And it's been such an incredible journey. But I think that's the type of thing that people are really grasping for right now. As much as the networks think that this is they just want to scare. If you get into the population and talk to people, they're really done. They really want something with substance.
Yeah.
And I think that's why my shows are packed. I think that's why Supernatural Circumstances does well. And I think people are just searching for that connection. They want something. They want the fun is great and it's wonderful and there's nothing wrong with it. But at some point people go, okay, but now what?
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know?
It's like we've been on the top layer of this dip for like 15 years.
Yeah.
Let's go further. Let's go deeper and see what is what else we can do. And I agree. You talk to people and they do seem to be hungry for deeper, meaningful conversations. Fine, we can see the shows. We see, okay, ghosts seem to exist. But there's so much more beyond that. That's just the outer wall of it all.
Very much so. And that is really the key. What you just said is really the key, which is so much of this actually has to do with the living.
Yeah.
And it has to do with what our minds are capable of projecting, what we're capable of doing in our interactions with our environment and non-physical, like things like psychokinesis and stuff like that. There's so much more than what's being delivered on. And I can't help but feel if a lot of these networks and these producers would grab on to that, it would take what they're doing to another level of relevancy that we have not seen on TV since shows like Sightings, for instance. Sightings would get into that, where they were taking a journalistic approach and presenting different points of view and stuff like that. So I think there's so much more that can be done, and we're just not tapping into that potential.
Not at all. Let's go ahead and take our next break. When we come back, I want to see what Morgan is really excited about as far as in this field lately. I'm curious to know where she's at, and there's so much more to talk about. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. And join me tomorrow on GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We are going to be live from the 300 Clifton Mansion in downtown Minneapolis. This is a very haunted location. It's also the place that the Minneapolis trolley tours are out of. And we're going to have a conversation with John and Norman, who are the owners of this fantastic building, this fantastic house. And we're hoping to be doing more events with them. We're going to be talking a little bit about that tomorrow. So please join us. We're going to be live from there doing our show. But I have with me right now Morgan Knudsen. We've been talking about we've been talking about all sorts of things. We've been talking about My Haunted Hometown. We've talked very little about her podcast, Supernatural Circumstances, which is absolutely, if you haven't checked it out, please do so. She is the co-host of that with Mike Brown. But one thing I do want to do as we are getting to the end of the program here, and there's a lot of things that I think it's fair for all of us to say, that whether it's new discoveries or just stuff that we're kind of getting into in this realm, whatever in as far as your podcast, your shows, is there a subject or a topic that's really been exciting you lately?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it seems like every day there's a new advancement in this field, which makes me go, what the heck? And I want to know more. I think the combination of what's happening within the fields right now, whether it be ufology or cryptozoology or the paranormal, like hauntings, things like that, and how everything is really coming back to one thing, which is consciousness. And where we used to, even, I don't know, I would say even, 10 years ago, people were saying everybody had a category that they were in. Oh, well, I enjoy investigating haunted places, but I don't do cryptids. Or, I like ufology, but I don't really do hauntings. Or I don't. And that's kind of how it used to be, where everything was slotted. And now the more you delve in and the deeper you go, the more you find every last bit of this is tied in together, and including each other, which is it all nets back to this idea of consciousness and our perception and how we are interacting and perceiving the world. And to me, that's what's been very fascinating, because I used to be one of those category people where
Yeah.
I was like, I was in this little category over here, and now I can't be anymore. Now I have to, I look at things more as a whole, and especially in the world of cryptids, and they have been very fascinating to me, especially here in Alberta, because we've got everything here, Sasquatch and Dogman and all sorts of stuff. And that's been an absolutely wonderful, heartfelt journey for me.
Can I just say that the thing that has been interesting me for the past year is exactly what you just said. And
Awesome.
that there was a moment, and I'm not going to go into the story, even though you haven't heard it. Listeners have heard it, where they could probably say it along with me, right? That we've seen a Bigfoot last year, and I was touched by one,
Wow.
and over in Indiana. And the thing about that was my awakening of what we're all, it's, I know we're all energy. I know everything is all energy, but that was where it's just like, why do we put ourselves in these silos when we're doing the same thing? We are putting out our intention of what we want to communicate with. And so
Yes.
to me, it's been focused more on actually alien and CE5 experiments, which we had an incredible one a couple weeks back that I'm still trying to kind of get through. But Morgan, I just want to say that it's is that our new awakening,
Yeah.
perhaps? You know,
Yeah. I think it is. I think on multiple levels, because once we begin to realize that we are not just a meat suit running around, and I know it's a very cliche thing to say that we are all physical or spiritual beings having a physical experience, but it really is true. And our perception of what we see around us is so narrow. One of my favorite fields of study over the years has been upright canids, dogman, and
sure.
whatnot here
Yep.
in Canada. And that has by far been the most, I I don't even know how to put it into words. It's been the most rewarding, most satisfying experience with experiencing and going into the field and experiencing these things beyond anything else that I've had in my career. And I mean, I've always had a soft spot, I think, too, for creatures who have kind of gotten a bad rap over the years. Like, I mean, I've got a snake who I've had here for 20 years, and he's my little boy, he's everything.
Yep. Yep.
And most of my fans know about him. And I have a very deep relationship with a lot of these things, and I've found these connections with some of these creatures out there, that if you bring in, like you touched on the idea of intention,
Mhm.
it's everything. You go out there with the intention of connection and peace, and I mean, whether it be what we consider like a physical animal, or whether it's a more spiritual animal, something like Dogman or something like that, you are going to have an experience that is going to be life changing.
Yeah.
And I think that has so deeply affected me, and my views and my want to continue in this field, because it's, you have these experiences, and I'm sure people who have seen Sasquatch and stuff like that will agree with this, is that you realize suddenly that there is a being that is looking back at you, and they are looking back at you, and they do have feelings, and they do have thoughts, and they are perceiving you in however, whatever world that they're existing in.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very special experience. So we really can't do this work in parapsychology or anything else without understanding that we are connected.
And I had theorized that people who go out there thinking Bigfoot is nothing but just an animal, I've theorized that may be why they don't often get any sightings, because they don't
Yeah.
understand. They approach it very differently than I do, and it sounds like how you do, where it's not like it's not an animal hiding behind a tree. This is something, to me, that's interdimensional. You call for them and you have good intention, they're going to come in some form. You're going to know it may not be a full-bodied, reveal, but it might be eye shine, it might be tree knocking.
Absolutely.
They're not throwing rocks at us because we're not a threat to them. We come with open hearts, and I think that
Yeah.
that is just as you talk about paradigm shifts and stuff. I think
Yeah.
that's a big one that I think that some may never really come to,
Yeah.
because I don't think I think there are some who don't want to see it that way. They want to see it as the unlabeled animal.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that is exactly how we have had our encounters also, where it's been an invitation and a thank you.
Yes.
And the one thing that a very dear friend of mine, when we've gone out to do this, she's indigenous, and she brings sage and sweetgrass, and we start the evening by
Mhm.
just saying thank you to the land, thank you for having us here, and if you feel like making a connection, we're here for it. If you don't, totally okay.
Yep.
And we have had some of the most incredible encounters. I was blessed a number of years ago to get quite close to one of the dogmen here,
Wow.
where we just got to see his face and whatever. One of the most beautiful faces I've ever seen. If you picture the most gorgeous wolf, black wolf with
Mm.
gray, and absolutely stunning. But it was an exercise of trust, and I don't
Yes.
negate that importance. It was, you could tell they were nervous. They were nervous. It was like they didn't, they're being careful too. And it was, yeah, it was, but it's how I don't know, ever since I was a child, I've learned to approach these beings. It's not some dumb animal like people
No.
are. This is something with feeling, and they've got a heart. They know intention, and just in the same way, if you approach a dog or anything, or a snake for that matter, like, oh, a stupid animal. Well, guess what? You're not going to have a good experience, and they know animals, whether they be spiritual or whatever. Everything is spiritual. um you know they know your intention. They know your heart, just as you'd approach anything else. um so I think it's so valuable to have these experiences, and there's so much we can learn from them. They are not the ones learning from us, that's
No.
for sure.
No, that's so well put. And yeah, I think that's exciting to hear your viewpoint on it, because we get a lot of guests on the show, and I am always going to respect and enjoy that their what their take on it and stuff. And there are very few, though, that we bring on when we talk about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, any sort of cryptid, that they see it anything other than an animal that they would love to be able to capture. And it's nice to hear other people that are just like, this is how we see it. And I think that we would see a lot more of them if more people were take that. It's kind of a leap of faith, actually,
Yeah.
to stay out there and be like, you know what, I'm going to open my heart. It
Yeah.
sounds so bizarre, but it's true. That's exactly what you have
Yeah.
to do.
It is, and it's opening yourself to life experience, which is really hard for people.
Yes.
Because you're fighting that fear of the unknown, which is a huge fear for a lot of people. But I approach them the same way I approach even my little python Galen, is that
Mhm.
he's a very gentle soul, and he's very dear. And I don't consider myself having a pet. I get to share this life experience, with a little soul.
Yes.
And he's got his own way of perceiving the world, and he's a very wonderful teacher, and he's just a blast to be with. But I get to share my experience with this little soul, and that's how I see the dogmen, in the same way, where it's like they've been here a whole lot longer than we have. And I think colonization, especially in Canada, has impacted them. And belief systems have impacted them. And I think to have these experiences, this is one of the analogies that I talk to people about a lot, is that, often, you see ghost hunters and stuff out there, and they're finagling with all their camera gear, and they've, modifying all their camera stuff and whatever. And it's like, well, I need a full spectrum camera, so on and so forth. But the reality is that the camera only sees what we see. And that's just how cameras function. And so in order to get what we would consider a ghost photo, that device has to be manipulated by whatever the energy is in the space in order for an image to appear in a photograph, because the camera can't do any more than what we can. And that's kind of how I see this stuff as well, where it's like, if you are blessed enough to be able to get to see something, it is not on accident. You're in the right headspace. You're in the right. I mean, you might be terrified once it happens because you don't realize what's gone on, but it's not just simply a matter of, oh, I just had the right gear. It's got to do with you, and you got to do the work yourself, emotionally, physically, in order to get yourself to the point where you can have these experiences, and it translates throughout all the fields in the paranormal.
Absolutely. I couldn't, once again, I couldn't agree more. Morgan Knudsen, thank you so very much for joining us. Her series, My Haunted Hometown, is currently on T+E, but if you want to go and check out her website, go to entityseeker.ca, or if you want to listen to her podcast with Mike Brown, which is Supernatural Circumstances, go to supernaturalcircumstances.com. Morgan, thank you so much for joining us. What a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Greg. It was amazing.
It was wonderful. We'll be back tomorrow at 300 Clifton. Everyone, have a good night.